I'm no stranger to the odd bit of weed, marijuana, Mary Jane, stunt, delicious herb broccoli, sportable spinach, the devil's lettuce, watty tabatty, special cigarettes, pot, reefer, grass, ganja, Aunt Mary, boom, chiba, baby ban. I've hunted on Bobo, I've inhaled the pale green mist of delight, I've sucked on Satan's funky green pipe, I've immersed myself in some spicy steam, I've snapped on some unusual salad, and I've took a hit on some damned blunts, 420, etc. I'll be totally honest with you, I've only ever done weed twice in my entire life. The first time was at a friend's house when they made brownies. Everyone around me was trying them and I didn't really want to. I'd never done drugs before, but seeing everyone having a good time compelled me to eat 8, one after the other, in the space of about 15 minutes. And as anyone who has ever done edibles before will tell you, this is a very bad move. Effectively, I slipped slowly into space and didn't reawaken until about 4 days later, and that's not an exaggeration. I think on the second day, because I ate more the day after, even though I was still high from the day before. I think we watched 50 Shades of Grey and all I had to do was sit there panicking that the floor was the wrong texture. So it wasn't exactly the most comfortable first experience with drugs. The only other time I've ever done drugs was at a music festival last year when a friend of mine had a spliff. I had about 2 drads of it and I had to go hide in a porta potty for 20 minutes having a little cry because it made me so anxious and paranoid. So it's pretty fair to say I'm not really a hardcore drug user. When it comes to the Bobo, more often I will say no. I cannot leave that in, that's ridiculous. Thankfully, I've had a much better experience playing Weedcraft Inc, a tycoon management game that's just came out on the PC. Weedcraft Inc is a game all about growing and selling weed. But unlike other games that deal with topics such as marijuana or any other kind of illegal activity, Weedcraft Inc offers an earnest and far more mature take on this difficult subject matter, and it kind of ends up being something quite special. Basic gameplay is quite simple. You basically have a room full of plant pots, you plant different strains of weed, you make sure it's watered, you make sure it's trimmed, eventually you can harvest it and then sell it to people in various shady locations around the city. Actually cultivating the weed is quite interesting. It's far more hands-on than it usually is in tycoon games like this. Not only do you have to make sure it's watered and trimmed and harvested correctly, there's also a lot of different factors that can affect its quality. Better quality weed will attract a higher price from the game's various social groups. You can cultivate better quality weed by fiddling with various different things, so the humidity in the room, the temperature, the types of lights that you're using, the type of soil that you're using. You also have to balance the chemicals. There's like 3 different bars that you've got to try and get the measurements correct, and later on in the game you can research this, so you can just spend some research points in order to find out what the optimal parameters are, so you make sure that, you know, you're selling the highest quality Mary Jane in town. But early on, when you don't have access to that resource, you can still manually adjust these elements to see what works and what doesn't, and that's a really interesting hands-on way of approaching this kind of game. There was something quite satisfying about, you know, just making tiny tweaks so that I made my weed ever so slightly better to make my customers happy, and this kind of emphasis on the details is a type of design that permeates throughout the entire game. This is a very stressful game. There's always a lot of things that you have to think about. Not only do you have to make sure that your weed is of good quality and that you're cultivating it at a rate that means that you're making a profit, you also have to worry about your relationships with your employees. If you don't keep up a good relationship with your employees, there's a chance that they might turn you into the police, or they might switch sides to a rival drug dealer. You have to worry about your relationships with your rivals, which is really interesting. You have to make sure that competition is at a healthy rate, that you're not stepping on other people's toes and that you're not andering other people, and you can actually form friendly relationships with your rivals. I think that's one of the things that is really unique about this game, is that it has a much more nuanced approach to everything, to the extent where your competitors aren't just villains. They are interesting, nuanced people that you can get to know. There's like lots of dialogue systems at play here where you can find out more about people and become friends with them, and then maybe you can like share research with one another, or maybe it means that if they think that you are stepping on their toes a little bit in an area, then you can kind of negotiate with them a bit more. So it's really interesting as to how there's a real human element at the heart of this, and this extends as well to the police. So obviously obviously the majority of this game you're playing as someone who is doing this illegally. You're growing weed in your house or in various places around the city and selling it in places where you're not meant to be, and this can garner the attention of the local police force, who obviously aren't going to be very happy about what you're doing. And it's got quite an interesting system where you have the police chief who kind of sits at the top of the hierarchy, and they want all drugs to be wiped out of the city. They have their own reasons to do this, but the officers themselves, the ones who will probably pop in to see what you're doing because you're growing weed in their jurisdiction, they are not as black and white as the police chief. They can be convinced, and I don't just mean like bribed. They can just be talked to on a human level, and they can understand what you're doing, and they might come around and be like, hey, I can smell weed, I like you as a person, I need you to be a bit more subtle. Or in one instance, a policeman came knocking at my door, I let him into my house, he saw I was growing weed, and he was like, no, cool, yeah, I used to smoke weed when I was in college, just please make sure you're not doing this in a way that's going to get you into trouble or, bring harm to anyone. And what a refreshing stance, I think, for a game to have, in that it's not just like weed bad or weed good, it's just really clever and really mature in how it looks at this with such a nuanced opinion and just says, yep, okay, this is all the different sides, and you're kind of having to navigate a landscape as complicated as the one that is currently occurring in real life. And I just think that's so unique, and it is by far the thing that makes this game so interesting. So on top of the finances that come with tycoon games, the fact that you need to make sure you have supply and demand and that your customers are happy, there's also this idea that you have to make sure that everyone around you is happy and that you're cultivating relationships that are meaningful, so you can ask for favours or you're not getting on anyone's wrong side. And you can play as a villainous drug lord if you want to, but it's far more interesting trying to play as someone who is just trying to make an honest living in something that is maybe unfairly illegal. I don't really think the game has like a motive here. I don't think it's necessarily trying to be like, oh, weed should be legalised, although it probably should, let's be fair. I just think it offers a much clearer picture on the situation than perhaps most media does, and I think that's really interesting. It helps as well that the game is split into distinct scenarios where you play as an actual character, so this isn't just like SimCity where you start a city. You actually play as a named character with a backstory. The first scenario, which is kind of the game's tutorial, you play as a young man whose father dies, and you have to come back from college where you were studying business to help basically make money for you and your younger brother, who's a bit of a deadbeat, and obviously you turn to weed. And playing as this actual character lets you roleplay a little bit. You're not some drug lord who's trying to take over the world, you're just some guy who wants to make a bit of money for him and his brother. And again, this combined with all of the other social aspects of the game just made it feel like a much more human story than I was expecting a game about growing weed to be. In the game's setting scenario, you play someone who's served 15 years in jail for growing and selling weed, and now is a 50-year-old man who can't find a job. One of your friends gives you a lot of money, and then it's up to you to decide whether or not you're going to start an illegal drug empire, or you can buy all the threat licenses and sell your weed completely legally to the citizens of the city. And I just think it's fun that it lets you do both of those things. I think it's really fun that it lets you roleplay as two completely different characters, and also lets you choose how legal or illegal your activities are going to be. And I think that's exactly what a game about growing and selling weed needs to be about. It needs to understand and acknowledge directly the socio-political aspects of this industry. The fact that the game does not paint any of your competitors as villains, it paints them as human beings trying to do a job. The fact that it doesn't paint you as a villain, it paints everyone around you as fully fleshed out human beings who are just trying to get by. And that's exactly what a game about weed should do. Especially in 2019 when it's legal in Canada and lots of states in the United States also have it legalized. The game should let you choose a path, and it should show you what that path entails. It should make you feel anxious about policemen knocking at your door because you're growing weed in your basement, and in a similar way it should just let you manage dispensaries and let you understand what that entails and how it's regulated and how people see it. And yeah, I've never played a tycoon game that has challenged me socially and politically, and I think that's really utilising this very unique genre in a really interesting way, because there are these kind of stories to be told, and this is probably the best medium for those stories to be told. To physically make you this person, this individual, a named character, and let you experience their journey through this genre. I don't know. I think it's really interesting. I really liked Weedcraft Inc. Also, it looks really nice. I really like the art style. I like that one of the characters is basically just Shaddy from Scooby-Doo. I like that. He's always been an influential stoner, so it's nice to finally play as him. And the soundtrack, which is like the myths of Reddit and hip-hop, is wonderful. It's just really nice to listen to. So I really enjoyed that as well. So yeah, that's Weedcraft Inc. It is one of the more interesting, I've said interesting about 900 times in this review, but it is interesting. It really makes you think. It's difficult. It really paints a clear and at times grim and at times enlightening picture of the world of marijuana, especially in the context of the United States. And this is a fun game to play. If you like business management games and tycoon games, I think you'll get a lot out of this. But if you also like playing a game that uses the unique elements of its genre to tell stories that can't be told elsewhere, then this is just one you need to keep an eye on and try out. It's a wonderful game. I'm really happy I got to play it. Excited to go back into it and to try it again. I failed a few times and had to restart from the beginning, but it hasn't felt like a chore. There's just something to this that's simultaneously really stressful and really relaxing, and I think I'm going to enjoy coming back to this on a very regular basis. So yeah, that's Weedcraft Inc. It's available right now on Steam, and I would very much recommend it. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe, and why don't you leave me a comment telling me about, I don't know, what's a legal thing that won't get this video flagged. Tell me about the time you've honked on a bit of Bobo, that you've suckled on some Chiba. Can I do that? Will my channel get banned if I asked you to tell me your weed stories? Why don't you just tell me if you're going to buy this game? That's probably a better way of doing it. Oh boy, I'm such a nerd.